Hello everybody and welcome back to ChäoS Head. I am recording, well basically it's the fourth part that I've recorded this week for this series. Like I said last time, just sort of trying to get ahead with the holidays coming up, as well as plans to start a brand new series sometime in January. Let me go ahead and get my timer started, and let's go ahead and pick up where we left off last time. Kozapi here had just asked us about that moment we went on TV last week. She wouldn't believe me even if I told her. I'm sorry, does it sound like the kind of story you would ever believe realistically? Really? Below? You heard what the whole time, though? Oh, okay. My mental voice had traveled that far? There was an unexpectedly great distance between the O-front roof and the station turnstiles. So the stronger the emotions, the further they reach. If that's the case, then if they're strong enough, can they go around the world? Then Kozapi would understand that I hadn't created such a ruckus in the intention of putting on a psychic performance. Way to go, Kozapi, you just did a double negative. You don't not have value. But in the end, it hadn't done any good. I'd prioritized my own life over saving Nanami, my little sister, had fled at the very brink of things. Kozapi stopped in front of Roft. She looked at me as she pointed at the store entrance. Apparently, the place she'd said she would guide me to was inside here. I didn't think there was anywhere to rest in Roft. Besides, there were a lot of customers in a small enclosed space there. Without my realizing it, my legs had started shaking. The cheers and bellows I'd heard from the pedestrian crossing that night echoed in my head. I didn't want to go anywhere that was full of people. I didn't want anyone to I didn't have anywhere to escape to if I entered Roft. And we're just supposed to believe you. Disregarding my fear, she went further and further ahead. Doing my best not to look at what lay around us, I had no choice but to hurry on after her. When we got on the upward escalator, Kozapi turned back at me, standing behind her. With her small frame standing one step higher, put her at about the same height as me. But did she really turn out fine? Like, was she ever actually in danger? I hadn't saved her myself. It was the same as if I hadn't done anything. Yeah? Oh, you know, just trying to grasp a giant sword that was apparently just kind of hovering in place above the pedestrian scramble. No, I was trying to take hold of the sword. It was an illusionary sword, one that blended into the vista I saw on the rooftop. It didn't really blend in, though. Oh, of course you know what we're talking about. Yeah, that's it. It said I could grasp it if I reached out, but I couldn't do it. I unthinkingly shouted. A couple passing us on the downward escalator gave me cold looks, and I hurriedly covered my mouth with my hand. Kozapi, how do you know about D-swords? Of course you do. When we got off the escalator at the 5th floor, Kozapi casually raised her right hand over her head. It was similar to the gesture of someone who was using her hand to create a shadow as protection against the brightness of the sun. Light suddenly materialized in the air, following her hand. No, more so than simple light, they were lines. If I were to make an allegory, they resembled a wireframe. Numerous lines of light intermingled intricately in the space where there should have been nothing, and at last they formed a shape akin to that of a snowboard. Several streaks of blue light, more fiercely brilliant than the wireframe lines, ran across it. Kozabi closed her open hand. The instant she did, the thing that had been a wireframe transformed into a solid, cold-looking metal plank, as though textures had been applied to it. Also, I feel like that's a little too big for her to actually really wield, like, effectively, realistically. Especially because there's one hand on the inside here, and she's just kind of got this other hand back there. It's maybe holding on to something, but then what the hell is back there that hand is actually holding on to? Its shape was all too separate from that of Ayase's and Senna's, but even so, it had the same sort of air to it. We did red last time, so let's do green. Too sinister to be called a plank, too undecorative to be called a sword. It possessed both innocent ferocity and an awe-inspiring destructiveness. She carelessly held it on high. What part of that delicate body of hers contained such strength? As far as I could tell by looking, its size made it seem certain to be at least over 5 kilograms. Kozapi, literally reading my internal doubts, turned back toward me and smiled shyly. Okay, sure, Delusion. She is an android created specifically to protect us.
Hi.
Did she just say android? What kind of anime premise is this? Ignoring my stupefaction, Kozabi clenched one hand into a cute fist. Right. Of course you do, because that just seems like the standard anime premise is that you have a android that its job is to protect you, but it can also work as a maid. You're sleeping on the floor because we sleep on the couch, and our bed is covered in various boxes and other crap. I see. How convenient. Well, there might not be anything wrong with accepting Kozapi as an android, but there was a single condition I simply wouldn't back down on. Oh, of course we're gonna ask that question. For some reason, I'd slipped into a formal language. No, hold up, I just asked something totally unbelievable. As I waffled over whether or not to apologize, Kozabi blushed and lowered her eyes. Of course you are. Of course you are. Why wouldn't you be? If you're supposed to be an android whose job is to protect us, that can also function as a maid, why the hell wouldn't you be capable of doing ecchi things? You know. Very generic trope. It really is. A battle-capable maid android who's also designed for nighttime service. That's straight out of an eroge. Her optional features are complete across the board. Heh. Japanese technology is #1 in the world. Okay, yeah, that went on for, about 10 minutes. Otherwise, I would have ended this the last part there, but yeah, that would have actually basically approached like 50 minutes. That was, yeah. A sword in hand, Kozabi strode lightly around the store, even while I went on having such a moronic delusion. Kozabi made no attempt to conceal her sword from those around us, as if it were perfectly natural for her not to do so. The same as Senna. She too had walked around the dead center of Shibuya, carrying her ginormous D-sword without a thought to spare for how it might inconvenience others, because others can't see it, generally speaking, and it doesn't affect them, presumably unless we want it to affect them. They were far too composed about it. Senna and Kozabi were both abnormal after all. What I then recalled was a smell, the smell of blood. I recalled the spectacle of those fallen, blood-drenched thugs. Oh, so Kozabi is also a murderer. That's... Of course, that's fun. Ha! Had they really died? Oh, okay. They're Rochi. Okay. Rochi? Oh, of course. But let me guess, you figured if you'd actually killed them, you would have freaked us out and we would have gone ahead and just ran away from you, which would have made perfect sense. I distinctly picked up on what lay in her heart as she said this. There was not a single scrap of malice within her. She simply wanted to retaliate against bad people, and she didn't see anything wrong with it. And that sounds like interesting information that we should want to know. She too might be twisted in a different way from me. Still carrying her colossal D-sword, Kozabi started walking off. She was short and slender-armed and didn't look strong at all, but she proceeded with light footsteps, showing no particular signs of feeling the sword's weight. She frequently seemed about to bump into passing customers or displayed goods with the tip of her sword, and I covered my eyes each time. Miraculously, however, she got by without hitting anyone. Our destination turned out to be a staircase. It was dim and unlike the rest of the floor, empty of a human presence. No one had come here. How unexpected for such a desolate space to exist in the famous Roft store, hardly a 5-minute walk away from Shibuya Station. I assume because most people don't take department store stairwells to get around, they take escalators and elevators and things to get between floors if there's multiple floors. How could she know something like this that I didn't, even when she'd moved here only a few weeks ago, and I've been living in Shibuya for almost 2 years. Really? It's only been 2 years? Evidently in a positive mood, Kozabi sat down on the stairs. She nonchalantly laid her D-sword close beside her. Since I'd also lost the ability to put up with the ache in my sides, I decided to take a short breather as well. I don't... Why are you mentioning elephants, bunnies, and lions? I have zero freaking clue as to what she's talking about. What are you talking about? Well, it's a little hard to get that out of what you were saying.
動物さんとかいろんな形に見えることがあって。
Ah, so that's what you mean. Yeah, I've experienced the same thing. And on the O front, well, I guess again, I guess technically supposed to be zero front, whatever. As well, when I tried viewing things from that perspective, it was there. A D sword blending into the scenery.
はい、ピンポンです。コズピーが最初に見えた時は、ハムポンポンが死んじゃった時。
Who? M Pon Pon?
小学生の時飼ってたハムスター。
Okay.
ほいで、ハムポンポンのお墓を作ってあげようって土手に行ったのら。でもスコップ忘れてお墓作れなくて、うみゃーって泣いていたら、お空にこの剣の形が見えた。それからはいろんなところでよく見るようになったのら。
How did you get your hands on it? I found a D sword, but in the end I hadn't been able to get a hold of it no matter how much I stretched my hand out. I didn't feel anything, and I couldn't grasp it.
ただ願ったんだよ。
You wished to obtain it, but then even I... Busby peeked up at me and shook her head slightly.
違うのら。願ったのはね、殺してやりたいっていうこと。
Okay. Her mental voice rang out clearly in my head. I hadn't mistaken her words. Just now, she said it distinctly. To kill. She'd spoken bashfully. The stairs between Rolf's 5th and 6th floor were very quiet, with only a little bit of background music leaking in from the store interior. Neither of us said a thing. Somebody's breathing resounded loudly in my ears. Was it hers? No, it was mine. The stairs where no one came. A blind spot in the center of the town called Shibuya, a kind of air pocket. I swallowed to moisten my parched throat.
そう願いながら、ミューって空見たら、また剣が見えて。でも、その時まで剣とは思ってなかったよ。なんだか、ガキーンってしたものって思ってた。
A big, clashy thing.
あれで、ブーンってやったら殺せるかなって、無意識に手を伸ばしたら、本当につかめたのら。
And then, what happened? What did you do with it?
殺そうとしたけど、できなかった。コズピーの力じゃ、半殺しにするのが精一杯だったのです。
Them? This girl was broken.
壊れてないよ。プンプン。ここに剣あるもん。
I could see from the way she gazed lovingly at the D sword by her side that she placed absolute faith in it. Her heart, too, conveyed the same thing to me. Would I be incapable of attaining a D sword unless I became as broken as her? Was I still unbroken in the first place?
この剣が怖くて仕方なかった。
So, Orihara Kozue had thought, at least until she came to Tokyo. But now things were different. Now it was very dear to her. It was something priceless. As long as she had this sword, she had nothing to fear. This sword would protect her. This sword was her heart, her other self. It had already been 3 weeks since she'd come to think that way. Since an early age, Kozue had been able to hear the voices of other people's hearts. She no longer remembered when she had first become aware of it. She'd gone crazy, she'd gotten sick. Even at her young age, Kozue thought she mustn't let anyone find out about her ability. And so she concealed it from her parents as well. Because of her power, she was incapable of making friends, and she became distant from her family, and those around her were creeped out by how she was a child with astoundingly good intuition. Even after coming to Shibuya, she feared going to school. She didn't want to meet anyone, whatever the case, she reckoned they would find her repellent. On the day when she was originally supposed to transfer in, and the day after it, and even the day after that, she wandered around Shibuya instead of going to school. The school must have contacted her parents. Surely they'd realized she was skipping without permission, but neither of them said anything about it to her. Unlike in the boondocks where she'd lived before, no one found fault with her, even if she walked around the city all morning on a weekday with her appearance that would make it easy for people to mistake her for a middle school student. Several days after she had begun to meander around Shibuya, she found a resting place on the stairs inside Roft, and sitting there while zoning out became part of her daily routine. On that day, too, she left Roft to go home around dusk after spending close to 4 hours there. Drops of rain fell from the dark gray sky. Kozue didn't have an umbrella with her, but she listlessly walked into the rain without either looking up at the sky or minding the wetness. At this point, something flew into her field of sight. The world is ending. A signboard with a single phrase on the top of it, damp with rain, the handwritten letters were blurry. The person holding the board was a lone homeless man sitting inconspicuously at the side of the road in the midst of the rain. He hung his head, and she couldn't see his expression. Maybe he was dead. That form of his, seeing it as a mirror image of how she herself had appeared on the stairs of Roft, Kozue stopped her feet. For a brief moment, she hesitated. She'd never seen a homeless person before coming to Tokyo, and here was one she had no familiarity with. She even felt disgust when she looked at him. She worried, what if she spoke to him and he got her involved in something dreadful? But at the time, what surpassed Kozue's anxiety was the drive to kill him. It was an all too sudden urge, but she had the feeling that by following it, she might be able to slay her current self as well. Which was why, after some wavering, she sent the man the voice of her heart.
世界は終わるの?
The man's shoulders trembled, so he wasn't dead. He slowly lifted his head. He gazed up at Kozue with the clouded eyes that peeked out from behind his wet bangs.
Ah, 終わるよ.
Kozue widened her eyes a little, startled. Not by how he confirmed the end of the world, she was surprised by the fact that he'd answered her. She hadn't expected an answer. The people she mentally spoke to either became confused and made themselves think she was a hallucination, or trembled in fear and swiftly fled. Even if she succeeded in communicating with them, it was difficult for them to respond so calmly. Human thoughts were all too illogical and chaotic. Yet this man had answered Kozue's question with a simple sentence, without any change in his expression. The spirit she sensed through his voice was brimming with a deep sorrow. His heart was crying, Kozue thought.
君は剣を持っているね.
Okay, interesting that he knows that.
どうしてわかるの?
君のような子、他にも知っているから.
That is also interesting. Kozue raised her hand above her head and showed him how she drew her D-sword. She pointed its tip at him.
この剣が見えるの?
見えないよ。
じゃあ、どうしてわかるの?
おじさんが悪い人だからだよ。すまない。
どうして謝るの?
おじさんのせいなんだ。
どうしておじさんのせいなの?
忠告しかできないから。動き出してしまったから。もう、おじさんには止める術がないから。
じゃあ、おじさんを殺せば、コズピーは悪くなくなるの?
その剣は、君を殺す者にも、守る者にもなる。思い出してごらん。空を見れば雲が。川を見れば流れがそこにあったはず。それと同じこと。その剣はいつも君のそばにあった。自分自身の心を見てごらん。そこにあるのがその剣なんだよ。
でも、殺したいって願ったら、これが手元にあったんだよ。この剣は コズピーとコズピーの周囲にあるあらゆるものを殺すためのものじゃないの？
Why would the sword be for killing you?
負の感情は否定されるものじゃない。人が誰しも持つものだからね。特別じゃないんだ。どう向き合うかだよ。目をそらしてはいけない。自分を否定してはいけない。世界は共造。君の心の中にある性は同時に負となりうるし、その逆もまた可能。世界が終わるのか、生き続けるのか、君たちだけなんだ。
In the end, Kozue didn't kill him. The urge dissipated as he spoke to her. She didn't quite understand what he was saying. Even so, after thinking about it furiously, she reached a single conclusion. The sword was herself. If she looked at it without rejecting it, it would save her. That was why Kozue purely heartedly came to depend on this sword of hers. I craned my neck as I listened to Kozue's story. Or excuse me, Kozupi's story. Who on earth was that man? A homeless person with a poster. I mean, he kind of looked like what our character looks like, I'm gonna be honest. But like an older version. Come to think of it, I'd felt as if I'd seen people like that several times before. Had they all been the same person? What I didn't understand was how the homeless man knew about D-swords. Maybe, unbeknownst to me, D-swords were in truth renowned throughout Japan? Nah, of course not. I scrutinized Kozupi. Her expression was so serene that I had a hard time reconciling it with the disturbing things she told me earlier about killing. She softly glided her fingers over the surface of her D-sword.
そういえば、あのおじさん、別れ際にこんなこと言ってたのら。君たちは特別な存在だ。中でも一番特別なのは、その目、誰の目を産み落とした少年。
Very interesting.
らしいんだって。
I was speechless. What the hell?
西条くん、心当たりあるの？
いや、別に。
I wouldn't say not really, but I would potentially say I'm not 100% certain, or, you know, something to that effect.
嘘ら。心は正直なんだよ。西条くんは今、ものすごーく関係ありますって考えてる。
Damn it. It was hard to deal with how she picked up on everything.
なんか、怖い顔になってる。その目、誰の目って、西条くんが最初に考えたの？
Well, as far as we know, yes. I bit my lip and stood up. I yanked out the tissue stuffed up my nose. Why? I mean, I know nosebleeds, you typically stuff tissues and things like that up your nose to, you know, block it so it's not getting everywhere, but little shocked that we still had that, apparently. Kozubi cocked her head to one side and looked up at me.
どこへ？
I'm going home. My side still ached, and I descended to the first floor via the stairs rather than using the escalator or an elevator. Thanks to that, I managed to avoid the crowd on the way outside. And Kozubi trailed differently after me, teary-eyed.
コズピー、何か怒らせるようなこと言ったかな？
Ignoring her question, I frantically made the wheels in my head turn. The homeless man Kozupi had met, a friend of Shogun? Why had he brought up Whose Eyes Are Those? Who was the boy who gave birth to Whose Eyes Are Those? Me? No, wrong. I wasn't a special boy or whatever. I wasn't a hero. After all, I hadn't been able to attain a D-sword. I was just your average Joe, villager A. I wanted to stay that way. I didn't want to become special. I take a pass on having another experience like the one at Zero Front. Then who was that boy? The only person who came to mind was the true new-gen criminal, Shogun. Shogun was the old man, no matter how I looked at him, but his voice and stature were contrarily close to those of a boy, and he obviously wasn't ordinary. He was special. The message of whose eyes are those, which had appeared in 2 out of the 6 new-gen cases, words I'd often used in my own head. What significance could there be to these thoughtless words? Did the reason why Shogun targeted me with such persistence is hidden in them? Maybe I ought to search for that homeless guy. He should be somewhere in the city even now, carrying as usual a poster with an incomprehensible message. Look for him, and what next? I stopped, and I shook my head as though to deny my own thoughts. What would become of searching for him? On the contrary, it might result in me plunging into danger of my own accord. Maybe he was working for Shogun, and this was a trap to lure me in. What did I plan on doing if I strolled over to meet him, and another quest began from it? I was sick of the kind of terror and anguish I'd been through the last time. The same thing went for Kozupi. Why had Kozupi, with this particular timing, begun speaking to me in my mind? Perhaps she, like Yua, had been directed by Shogun to approach me. Going by all the dangerous things she'd said about killing and half-killing, it was also conceivable that she might be an accomplice to the new-gen murders. After the disturbance at Zero Front, Rimi had unexpectedly disappeared without contacting me once. Ayase was in the hospital after her failed suicide attempt, and not only was safe, but my 2 allies had vanished. Was there any guarantee that Rimi would come back for me? Was it really true that Rimi had simply been taking time off from school lately? I'd only heard it from Kozupi. I couldn't determine whether or not she was lying. I had the ice-cold sensation that every hair on my body stood on end. When you got down to it, my world was all too empty. There was no foundation for me to believe in. Everything seemed like a lie.
それは被害妄想なのら。
Kozubi stood close behind me. Her mental voice was as carefree as always. She bore her brutal-looking D-sword with both hands. She cast an upward glance at me. I looked away from her. Are you my ally or my enemy? Which one? Have you come to kill me?
コズピはただ
Only? Without warning, Kozubi let out a strange cry. When I raised my head, startled, she was waving her hand in some other direction instead of looking at me.
セナさん見て
Senna-chan? Surely not. I followed Kozupi's line of sight, and there, as expected, was
小杖か
Aoi Senna was walking toward us, her D-sword on her shoulder, and an expression that spoke of an endlessly bad mood on her face. I couldn't help assuming a defensive position. Why had Senna appeared here? Another coincidence? Or a planned-out trap? Did these two know each other? Then had Kozubi called her here for them to kill me together?
だからそれは被害妄想だよ
But what should I believe in? Though I'd encountered Senna many times before now, she never tried to attack me. That didn't necessarily mean she was my ally. Besides, she scared me.
セナさんは怖くないよ
ちょ
Kozubi, please don't speak out of turn like that.
怖い何のことだ
Unsurprisingly, Senna also seemed to be able to hear Kozue's inner voice.
なんでもないです
Though nary a glance at my state of panic, Kozubi seemed awfully delightful. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. You can't fault somebody for thinking that Senna's a little scary because she's running around with a sword, and she just seems to have resting bitch face. Just gonna go ahead and put that out there. She really does. Like, she never looks happy. Like, not even a neutral expression. She always looks like she's upset. She faced down as she clung bashfully to the hem of Senna's clothes. They made such an amusing pair that I started to feel like an idiot for being so anxiety-ridden. They also appeared to be sisters, a strong-hearted, reliable big sister and the quiet little sister who adored her. With both of them having small breasts, man, there was nothing to say about it, but good job. No. Get a hold of yourself. Kozupi's gonna read your mind again. Besides, I would lose my life if I relaxed my guard. I wonder what kind of connection lay between them. Had they become acquainted at school, but they were in different grades? Was there something like a bond between fellow sword bearers? Were both of them working under Shogun? I still like a cat to prepare myself to run away at a moment's notice. In concrete terms, that meant putting my weight on the balls of my feet. By doing this, you could slip into motion with a cat's swiftness. Allegedly. I'd read about it in a manga a long time ago.
セナさんはね、コズピーが東京に来てから最初のお友達なのら。ね、ね。
Rather than replying, Senna gave me a glare. It made me think she'd slash out at me with her sword, but she didn't do anything. She seemed particularly angry at my calling her scary.
小杖、どうしてこいつと？
たくみちゃんはクラスメートです。
Takumi-san?
ほいでね、たくみちゃんはコズピーの剣が見えるんだよ。
それは知っている。こいつもギガロマニアックスだ。
Gigolo what?
ギガロマニアックス。
I think we heard it. We're just curious as to what the hell she's talking about.
理想度が見える人のこと。たくみちゃんもそうだよ。
Gigalomaniac. Who had decided on that name? If there were a name for it, did it mean this ability wasn't all that rare?
あは、セナさんはガルガリ君買いに行くとこなんですね。
それは。
Oh, and she's blushing. Apparently, Kozubi had read Senna's mind. Speaking of which, I'd seen Senna eating a crunchy-kun before. It was almost wintertime. It was kind of impressive that she could eat popsicles outdoors, despite the increasing cold. Guess she must really love them.
ほいじゃあ、みんなで一緒に行きましょう。
Kozubi declared in her internal voice, then tugged playfully at Senna's hand and began walking off with her.
たくみちゃんも、はーやく。
We didn't say we wanted to join, though.
いや、僕は。
I've been intending to decline her offer and go straight home, but... Just then, Kozubi went all teary-eyed. Her damp gaze pleaded with me silently. Beside her, Senna fired a biting glare at me.
ついてこい。お前にもおごってやる。
It would seem that Senna too was weak against Kozupi's weeping attacks, and at her urging, I reluctantly went toward a convenience store located close by a police box. After she bought one crunchy-kun for each of us. The two of them sat against the handrail in front of the police box and bit into theirs. Kozupi really did seem overjoyed. Senna, on the other hand, wore an indifferent look. I was going out of my mind. The police officer on duty was right in front of our eyes. Despite that, he showed zero interest on paying attention to the two girls who were presently breaking the swords and firearms control law. He was a policeman, for Pete's sake. He could obviously see us. He didn't pay them any heed, much less arrest them.
食べないの？
When Kozupi pointed it out, I helplessly bit into my crunchy-kun. The gazes of those around us bothered me. Senna and Kozupi were cute, the spectacle of two cute, flat-chested sisters together with a creepy otaku, and on top of that, with all of us eating crunchy-kun under the cold open sky, was so surreal. We couldn't avoid standing out. Was I being overly self-conscious? I constantly heard taunting snickers. A hallucination? Was it just Kozupi's laughing? I didn't want to be conspicuous. I didn't want anyone to look at me. My fear of others' gazes. I shouldn't put on a hat or something. Or I should have put on a hat or something. In any case, I wanted to get out of here ASAP. As I desperately kept on eating my crunchy-kun with the goal in mind, my body went chilly. This was totally going to give me diarrhea. I wondered if the two of them weren't cold.
で、梢。なぜこいつと一緒なんだ?
Okay, this part is also, again, starting to run a little bit long, so we're probably going to end this in just a little bit.
こいつじゃなくて、たくみさんですよ。たくみさんが悪い人にいじめられてて、倒れてたのだ。だからコズピーが解放してあげたの。
She'd tended to me?
ディソードを使ったのか?
殺したかったとかバキって。
Kozupi appeared to be gesturing to illustrate what she was saying. But because her enormous D-sword occupied her left hand, she had to wave her spare hand around. But that one was, of course, holding her crunchy-kun. Kozupi's crunchy-kun, from which she'd only taken a single bite, flew away in a perfect arc. It hit the middle of the road and splattered. Kozupi stared at its remnants, looking as if she were about to burst out crying.
うかつな真似は避けろと言っただろう。
ごめんなさい。もったいないお化けが出ちゃう。
The leftover boogeyman and not just the leftover boogeyman?
アイスのことじゃない。ディソードのことだ。
Senna handed Kozupi the crunchy-kun she'd been eating. Apparently she was giving it to her. As she took it, Kozupi went all shy and bowed her head. To think that Senna could be so kind. How unexpected.
でも悪い人には罰ゲームをするのが当たり前だよ。
A punishment game sounds kinda kinky. Who was it who had enveloped those pricks in a bloodbath? Kozupi, perhaps? Or me?
たくみさん、セナさんはね、すごーく何でも知ってるんだよ。リソードっていう名前もセナさんに教えてもらったのら。あと、リアルブータ。あれれ、ブッダ
リアルブート。
あ、そうそう。
What was it? I'd never heard of those words before. The same was true of that gigolo whatever from before.
リアルブートしてない件は誰にも見えなかったはずなのにね。セナさんにだけ見えてたの。理想度が見える人に会ったの。セナさんが初めてだったんだ。その時は、おひゃーって思って、なんで見えるんですかって聞いちゃった。ギガロマニアックスだからなんだって。
ギガロマニアックスって何なの？
さっき言ったのら、剣が見える人だよ。
Sure, but there's presumably more to it than that. No, in greater detail, like the principles of how it works.
ディラックの海に干渉できる力を持つもの。それがギガロマニアックスだ。
Senna answered instead.
ディラックの海。
Senna cast a scornful glance at me as I tilted my head. Well, why are you looking at me like that? Contrary to appearances, I'm pretty damn smart. I sort of remembered something about the Dirac Sea being a concept in quantum mechanics.
負のエネルギーでいっぱいに満たされた観測不能の境界面とかだっけ？
大雑把に言えばそんなようなものだ。そしてそこに干渉するための端末がディソード。ディラックの海に突っ込んだパイプの先端と考えればいい。ディラックの海とつながっているからディソードも負の物質で構成されている。無限に崩壊している存在なんだ。だから普段は普通の人間には触れることも見ることもできない妄想のようなものでしかない。このディソードこそ あらゆるリアルブートのためのショートカット的役割を果たす。ディソードとディラックの海とのチャネルを大きくすることで、ディラック方程式の空港理論によって追生成が起き、粒子と反粒子を作り出せる。この粒子がギガロマニアックスが生み出す妄想、世界にとってのエラー。そのエラーを現実とするには、作り出した粒子を他人のデッドスポットに送り込めばいい。粒子は即座に電気信号に変換され、周囲の人間に共通の認識、現実として成立する。逆に消したいときは、粒子を送り込んだデッドスポットに、今度は反粒子を送り込み、追消滅してやればいい。
Excuse me, sorry about that. Come to think of it, in the past, Senna had said,
世界の仕組みは3つの数字で全て説明できる。0と1、そしてマイナス1。ディソードはそのマイナス1を生み出すためのショートカットになる。
My head was getting all tangled up here.
周囲の人間に共通の認識となると妄想が現実になるって。
例えば、お前が今手にしているガルガリ君、お前にはどう見える？
どうって、水色をしたアイス。
その水色のアイスは本当に現実だと証明できるか？
Oh god, we're gonna have to do math proofs. A crunchy-kun was a crunchy-kun, wasn't it? You could tell with a glance, and it'd be cold if you ate it. I thought that sort of thing was obvious, but...
人は目で見たものを脳が認識して初めてそれが水色のアイスと理解できる。でも、脳が本人の意識しないままに嘘をついている可能性だってあるんだぞ。脳が生み出した自分一人だけがそう思い込んでいる妄想かもしれないんだ。
じゃあどうやって現実だって証明するの？
他の人もお前の持っているものが水色のアイスであると観測すれば、それは2人以上の人間の共通の認識となる。お前一人だけの妄想じゃなくなるんだ。妄想を現実にするときにはそれを逆説的に捉えればいい。
In short, if you coercively showed your solitary delusions, the particles formed by your D-sword, to the people in your surroundings, they would become real. And did I have that ability as well?
うずぴ、さっぱり。とにかく、この剣は普通の人には見えないの。
Kozbi gave Senna her crunchy-kun back, then tripped out into the road. She stood in front of the people walking along the street, and all of a sudden, she knew what she was thinking. Or who knew what she was thinking, started taking huge swings with her D-sword.
やめ！
I covered my eyes. She'd finally shown her true colors. In truth, she'd been a heinous murderer all along. The road would now be a sea of blood. If someone were cut down by that colossal sword, their torso would be divided straight in two. Kozapi was going to get caught red-handed. After all, the police box was right beside us. The police officer would clearly witness it.
たくみさん、そんなことにはなってないよ。
I wondered why it was so quiet, even though people were getting slashed up by a sword in the middle of Shibuya in broad daylight. No one was screaming. I didn't hear the policemen yelling either. I gradually opened my eyes. Nothing had happened. Kozapi continued swinging her gigantic sword around, although she seemed a bit embarrassed. It was clearly hitting passerbys, the roadside fence, the ground, and so forth, yet nothing happened. She didn't cut anything. For that matter, her sword was passing clean through things, almost as if it were illusions. No, wrong, it's the reverse. The sword itself had no substance. The people walking in the area didn't stir whatsoever. They couldn't see her sword.
ピンポンピンポーン。理想度は妄想の剣なのだ。
Now that you mention it, ISA had said something similar before, like the sword only appear in the eyes of those with the power. Besides, Senna let out a weary sigh and bit at her crunchy-kun.
あのディソードは今は小杖の作ったエラーでしかない。周囲共通認識はまだ成立していない。
リアルブートス したらみんなに見えるようになるのです。
Real boot. Was that the act of sending particles into nearby people's dead spots? Which wasn't to say I understood what a dead spot was.
ズシャーってしたりドガーってできるようにもなるよ。
And please explain it with something easier to understand than sound effects. But I grasped the basic nuances of what she meant. Slish slash probably signified cutting with her sword. Then would boom crash be hitting? What exactly was she cutting and hitting? Did Kozapi do such frightening things? Me too. Did I too possess a power like that? No, I'm not unique. I'm not a gigolomaniac. Because, after all, I'd failed to acquire a D-sword. I don't think they said there was a requirement to be able to get your own, just so you can see.
剣は見えたよね。だからそのうち匠さんも持てるの。
It's impossible. It had been impossible even up on Zero Front. I'd seen the sword, but I hadn't been able to take hold of it.
どうやって手に入れるかっていうと。
Kozue put a finger in her mouth and looked at Senna. Senna sighed again.
バイオリズムの上昇によって中脳変影系ニューロンのドーパミンが過剰分泌された時、ディソードは現れる。それは危機的な状況や興奮、悲しみ、憎しみ、笑いなど人それぞれだ。ドーパミン分泌量が多ければそれだけ観測しやすくなる。
匠さん、そういうことなのら。
The breadth of Senna's knowledge was apparent. Maybe she was unbelievably intelligent. More than that, she was so much more there. She knew so much more about it that she practically came across as the gigolomaniac scholar or something. First of all, even if you searched all through Japan, you'd have a hard time finding a high school girl capable of discussing such complex theories and technical terminology off the top of her head. Where on earth had she studied this? Why were such personages gathering around me? Or such mysterious personages gathering around me? Somebody, show me the answer. I'm too tired of pondering it. It revolted me to remain in this state of half-understanding. But I didn't feel like researching the rest myself, because, come on, none of them are normal. Embracing my bitter thoughts, I took one last mouthful of my melting crunchy-kun.
当たりだ。
The popsicle stick was covered with the word winner. Kozabi came back and took a look at my hand.
匠さん、すっごいね。
大した運だな。
セナさん、自分も当たりが出てほしかったって羨ましがってるのら。
そんなことは思っていない。
I don't think you can fool Kozabi that easily. After all, she just read everything you're thinking. Or she'll just read everything you're thinking.
セナさんはいつも当たりが出ないかなとワクワクしながらガルガリ君を食べてるのら。当たりを引いたのはどれくらい？
1割3分の何。
She really had it down. Did she recalculate it every time she ate one? Senna too had finished eating her crunchy-kun. She stared intently at the remaining stick, then let out a small snort. She'd drawn a blank, going by her face.
よかったらどうぞ。
Okay, this is a long-ass scene. I'm gonna assume this is basically like the end of this chapter, but it is really just going on and on and on. We are well past where I normally end these parts. So we're going to end this part here. I will see you all next time where we will be making our choice here. Probably finishing out chapter 7 if I have to make a guess. Like I said, I assume this is towards the end of this chapter. And so yeah, so I'll see you all next time. Till then, goodbye and farewell.